My name is Richard Turcsányi. My background is international relations and economy, and my main interests are Chinese foreign policy. My interest is quite broad, so because Chinese foreign policy is a broad thing. I would say there are maybe two main things I'm interested in. One is what is driving China to act internationally the way it is acting. And there are many possible answers. You can say China is acting the way it is because of domestic politics, or because of economy, or because of personality of a leader and other issues. This complex question is one thing which I'm doing, and I'm focusing on Chinese foreign policy towards Central Eastern Europe, for instance. But in the past I published a book on Chinese relations with Southeast Asia, specifically South China Sea. So this is all one research interest of mine. And the second one is more recent, and that is about perceptions of China. So how the world, various countries perceive this Chinese actions or global China. China is of course becoming a big issue. It's present everywhere. Its influence is felt everywhere, including here in the Czech Republic and Europe. But the way how we internationally perceive China is not only driven by the Chinese actions, but also by our own beliefs, our own reality, and so on. So right now, this is, I would say, the second main topic for me. And actually, as part of the Sinophone Borderlands project, over here in Olomouc, we are running a big public opinion survey of 13 European countries. And we ask respondents how they perceive China, what kind of policy they would like their country, their government to adopt towards China, whether, for instance, they see China better or worse than the EU or the US. So it's a really long survey, but it will give us lots of information about how public in these 13 European countries perceive China. So that will be firstly just very simple tables, but the data from the survey, there will be a lot of data. So we plan to publish many academic articles, and I suspect it will take us a month and probably a few years till we take all the use of all this data. And then in future, we also plan to do the similar survey in other countries, so in other Asian countries, in the Chinese neighborhood, and maybe we will expand to other parts of the world. Maybe Latin America, China in Africa is a big thing. So in a way, this question is, in my opinion, very much related to what the Sinophone Borderlands project is about. So the project is, we want to learn about China, but we want to learn about how China is interacting with the rest of the world. And as I said, from my perspective, we should take into account what China is doing and why it is doing that, but also how the rest of the world perceives it and how it responds to that. So for instance, I think for the viewers in the Czech Republic and in general Central and Eastern Europe, I already published an article which looks at how the communist past influences our views of China. Now, when you listen to Chinese officials, but also often Central Eastern European officials, they would often say that China and Central Eastern Europe are traditional friends, because supposedly during the Cold War we both had communist regimes, so that's how somehow we should be closer to each other. But you probably know where I'm going. In the Czech Republic, many people are very critical of the communist past, and actually it's a simple argument, but many in China still are not persuaded by that. Basically this communist past makes it more difficult for China to approach Central Eastern Europe rather than easier. which is what they think sometimes. And actually, even when you talk about Western Europeans, sometimes they look at our part of the Europe with suspicions, and they would think that exactly because of this communist past, somehow we might be closer to China or closer to Russia. So what I argue is that this communism is a very important legacy for us, and clearly there are some people who have positive views of Russia and China. But I would say that many people have very negative views, and this is impacting the relations with China. Specifically in the Czech Republic, compared perhaps to any other European country, views of China are very polarized here. And that's very much related to domestic politics. So you would have some people who think that China is a positive country, which we can learn from, and which, for instance, helped us during the COVID crisis. Then you would have other people who see China as the biggest security threat, as the biggest threat to our democracy, who see China as the original source of the problem of the pandemic. And it's very interesting to see how these two poles interact. And compared to other countries, this is quite unique. You don't see this kind of polarization in other countries. So there are many possible explanations what is driving Chinese foreign policy. And for many people abroad, so again here in the Czech Republic or abroad, they tend to look at China, Chinese government, and they imagine that their goal is to take over the world or increase the power of China and so on. That may be true, but I think that the consensus among people who study Chinese foreign policy is that the most important goal for Chinese government and the Communist Party is simply to stay in power. And if they need to expand, if they need to change a regime type in other countries, they would do that. But they wouldn't do it because that's the goal. They would do whatever it takes so they stay in power. And this is interesting because I think everyone would agree with this point, that for the Communist Party the most important goal is to stay in power. But I think that when we talk about what China is actually doing, we forget that this is what they care about. So I think it would help a lot if we, for instance, think about, okay, why China is doing some international propaganda? Why is it spreading disinformation about the origin of the COVID? And I think if we look at it from the perspective of the fact that they simply want to stay in power, then we understand that they need to persuade the Chinese citizens that it was not their fault why COVID spread, and that now they are showing that the rest of the world is doing worse job than they did, that maybe even America started the COVID. So again, this doesn't go against what I said, that China may be expanding. It may have very negative influence on the democracy, but I think to fully understand what is China doing and why is it doing, we need to really always keep in mind that simply the Communist Party wants to stay in power. And sometimes it really gives us a different view about what is going on. So for instance, about Chinese propaganda, Chinese Communist Party cares much more what Chinese people think rather than what Czech people think. Quite frankly, they don't really care what Czech people might think. What they care is what Chinese people think. And if Chinese people think that their government is loved around the world, that their government is doing better job than other governments, this is important for them. And actually, if reality is different, well, that's secondary.